Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels, and often I say that with a weird voice because, that's always fun. But today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about Google, technology, and racism in Silicon Valley. All quite strange things, as you know, like Google does searches, but how does it work? Nobody quite knows, or do they? I'm talking about Algorithms of Oppression by Safiya Noble, which was published in 2018. For those who don't know, Safiya Noble is an American professor in library science and in that kind of field, looking at sociology, anthropology, technology, computers, stuff like that. And she's, her career is mostly academic, she has published a few things here and there, Algorithms of Oppression, as well as Intersectionality on the Internet, a book that's about that, which was published a few years ago, I think. And she's also edited she's edited volumes of work too, which have been about this topic. She's a professor, so mainly on the academic side, and she also has a MacArthur Genius Grant, which is impressive in one hand, but also on the other, it mainly just shows that she knows people. And I've said that about other people in this video, or in other videos who've won the MacArthur Genius Grant. But without further ado, let's talk about Algorithms of Oppression. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Algorithms of Oppression focuses mainly on Noble exploring different aspects of Google and search engines and the internet at large. She frames this story in the beginning at least, coming from the perspective that she was working or hanging out with her nieces and nephews, and she wanted to ask them what are some things that are interesting to them, and she was going to search that on the internet and see what popped up. And one of the things she searched was black girls, because her relatives were black. I think Noble is biracial, but that's unimportant. But she was looking up black girls, and porn immediately popped up. At the time this was written, around 2010, and this was happening to other people at the time as well, as multiple people on Twitter and other websites pointed out that Google, especially for minority women, Google was pulling up a lot of porn websites. And so Noble was like, this is concerning given that I don't want my nieces exposed or to think that this is all that's expected of black women. And so she began to do more research and found that this is a consistent problem for Google. And this is interesting because we typically think of Google as a search platform, it's for the consumer, but it's actually an advertising platform, as Noble notes, that it's meant to sell ad space, more so than anything else. And Google has corporate interest. They're not really interested in fixing their search side of things. Only when they're called out and it might hurt their bottom line do they think about that. Noble also talks about how this affects anti-Semitism and misogyny, as when you search for Jew or things related to women, it pulls up negative results sometimes, or it shows the inequalities that exist in society. And calling attention to this, Google says that they have no control over their algorithm, but a short while later those problems are fixed, showing that Google can control some of its algorithm. It just chooses not to because they are full of malice, the company is full of malice, or the company isn't really interested in doing things as long as it doesn't hurt their bottom line, as I said before. She also talks about Black Girls Code, which is very good for Black women and getting them into STEM fields and getting them jobs and where they typically been underrepresented. But Noble and others have noted that Black Girls Code is seen as Silicon Valley's way of deferring responsibility onto the shoulders of minorities by saying, "Oh, we can't do anything about racism on the internet now. It's up to the minorities to fix it later." That's deferring responsibility, and it's not acknowledging that things can definitely be done now. She also talks about how there's racist works found on the internet without context, and racist images too. So nobody's really saying this is bad or anything like that, and people can stumble upon it, and they might develop stereotypes of different cultures, or they might make assumptions that are not found in reality. A good example of that is Dylan Roof, who found a bunch of websites that illustrated black on white crime, things that weren't actually true in nature, because the cases like white on white crime is much higher than black on white crime. But Dylan Roof said that he became interested in racialism and all sorts of things and saw the true enemy. And as a result, he ended up publishing a manifesto, and then he shot a bunch of people in church. And his search history revealed his deep dive into white supremacy, and how Google wasn't doing much to stop these white supremacist searches or making it very easy to find white supremacy, often on websites that there were no fact checkers for. She also talks about the right to be forgotten, which is something that has been implemented in Europe, but not so much in America. And Google doesn't really want to implement that in America because it might affect their bottom line again, especially if they make a lot of money off tracking people. But people have the right to be forgotten, according to Noble at least, because not everything should live forever on the internet. You shouldn't be punished by something that you did when you were 18, because we're all young forever. At least in terms of scandalous or racy pictures or something like that. And that's related to porn, because porn lives forever on the internet, because Google doesn't really sell it or doesn't really invest in right to be forgotten. And so politicians years later, or even teachers, are discovering years later that the porn that they did at one point in their lives is being dredged up, and it's getting them fired or in trouble. And it shouldn't really do that, especially because no one was ever really meant to find that, but Google is making it available, and there's no way to really delete that, especially if you've moved on and changed over a period of years. She also talks about the Library of Congress classifications and how they've changed over times to reflect change in cultural values. Especially racist terms are no longer part of those classifications, but search engines relied on those, and they haven't changed much. So it seems like those search engines, the way they index websites and whatnot, need to be changed in order to reflect changing cultural values and not allow white supremacy to thrive. She also talks about the idea of being colorblind and how that's praised in Silicon Valley by tech-savvy people like Elon Musk, but it's often a liability, because if you don't see color, then you don't see how race affects outcomes in society and how the internet is impacting minority success, and minorities are often put at a disadvantage on the internet. Noble also talks about how apps alone are not enough to fix this problem, how Silicon Valley is trying to create technological solutions to the problems that exist, but that only exacerbates the conditions or makes them, it doesn't really improve them at all. So the answer to this technological problem is not going to be solved through technology alone. She then goes on to a sort of epilogue where she interviews a person named Candace, who is a hairstylist of sorts, a black hairstylist, who did a lot of their work outside of the internet, but found that the internet was a place that they had to be in order to gain more customers. But the internet has, and technology in general have changed to such a great point that they're not making as much as they used to. And there's especially a problem with Yelp, where Yelp is a place where people can review their business, and where people can find their business. Yelp kind of extorts business owners into paying for their service in order to increase visibility. And when Candace decided not to pay Yelp, they hid their business on the search results page, and they kind of stifled reviews because their business wasn't being reviewed enough. Whenever anyone did offer a review, Yelp was like, "Oh, you must be paying this person to give a review." And so you can see the intersection of racism and technology there, and how for a lot of businesses, maybe the internet and technology aren't improving conditions. And then she ends the story by talking about Trump and how he was elected through fake news being found on search engines, and how it's clear that over time, since she started doing her research around 2010, Google hasn't improved, and it might actually be getting worse. And that's about where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with algorithms of oppression. One thing in particular that Noble talks about is racism in Silicon Valley. So technology is often made without considering the impact on minorities, that people develop this technology in a colorblind capacity, so thinking that it might affect all minorities, all races the same. And that's not really the case, because the internet is made, as Noble talks about, with the idea of white hegemony in mind. So it's always doing things in service of that white hegemony. And what you end up with is a sort of redlining of the internet, whereas before that happened with real estate, now it's happening with the internet, where there's disproportionate access to the internet. And when people do have access to it, you end up with white supremacy being spread in multiple formats. So in Silicon Valley isn't really considering all of this, either because they're, as I noted before, they might be filled with malice. There's these people who say they're colorblind, but as noted by Noble, there's people who have had manifestos, especially the Google manifesto, where the guy was women in tech don't belong, or something like that. And so if people are actively misogynistic, what else are they? Are they actively racist? Are they trying to make things worse? Or are they just lacking an understanding of diversity and racism in society? And that's making their work even worse because it's uninformed. This happens with Google algorithms, as she talks about in the story, how it spreads fake news, which impacts minorities. It allows for people to easily find white supremacy and do violence against minorities. And you see how it affects Black women when porn is the first thing that pops up. You also saw that with the story about Yelp and Candace. And she doesn't really talk about Twitter too much, but we do see that today, how a lot of users are not a lot, but a population of users are being anti-Semitic, are being racist and sexist, and targeting those groups, and making things worse. And Twitter doesn't want to moderate their forums, again, either because they feel they can't because of free speech, or because the creators, the people who own Twitter, might be conservative in nature and might feel that this is necessary to keep those people in their place, or something like that. And often the onus for fixing any of this is placed on future generations. It's placed on the shoulders of minorities, as it has been for years. White people can't fix this problem. It's up to Martin Luther King Jr., it's up to Malcolm X, it's up to Reverend Al Sharpton. It's up to all of these people of color to fix the problem, to bring white people to a place of progress, rather than us meeting in the middle and coming up with a common solution. And so the onus of fixing technology is placed on future black coders. And the problem might grow by then, so who knows if they're actually going to be able to fix that problem. There's a quote from this, allow me to read it to you. This is only exacerbated by framing the problems as pipeline issues instead of as an issue of racism and sexism, which extends from employment practices to product design. Black girls need to learn how to code is an excuse for not addressing the persistent marginalization of black women in Silicon Valley. So again, rather than, fixing the problems and recognizing that it's racism or sexism, it's just underrepresentation of black women in Silicon Valley. Once we get enough of them in, they can fix the problem and everything will be taken care of. But, that's not fixing the inherent racism or sexism that exists within the workforce of Silicon Valley, or the color blindness that exists there. So, they have to fix their own problems before they can expect black women to be able to solve it. And ultimately, technology reflects the will of those who create it. She talks about the white hegemony being propagated in technology. And as long as that continues to exist in society, as long as we continue to live in what is essentially a white supremacist evangelical society, the technology that is created is going to reflect that. And it's going to be hostile towards minorities. I also like how Noble considers the role of capitalism in Silicon Valley as well as in the technology that is created. Capitalism has taken hold in society and it has made a lot of things worse for the wearer. It has made the Medicare system, the healthcare system worse. It's made housing worse. It has made college worse. Everything is just ridiculous under capitalism, and that holds true for technology. As she notes, Google is a platform that allows us to connect to others. It allows us to find websites, and it allows us to find information, but it's not meant for the consumer. It's meant to sell ads. We are essentially the product that are being sold in an effort to, mine our data and sell it to the highest bidder, who can then use it for whatever nefarious purpose that they have. So the unfortunate nature of technology is that it's there for, not only the white hegemony, but it's also for capitalistic purposes. Once it was taken out of the hands of the government, it was put in the hands of private business interests who only care about money being made. All of these companies in Silicon Valley are only interested in the bottom line. This isn't a radical idea being said. Many companies have openly admitted to this, like Twitter, for example, or even Google themselves. They note that it would be too costly to solve any of the problems that are coming up. And in reality, it might be costly, but it's more costly to propagate human suffering. But in capitalism, human suffering is seen as an unfortunate but necessary evil in order to make money. So as long as these companies continue to make money, and as long as all of this bad stuff does not affect their bottom line, they're going to do nothing. There's no incentive to do anything about it. If the government were to institute laws or something like that, or the people were to, hold pitchforks at them and say, hey, you got to fix this, maybe they might do something. But as it stands, capitalism does not, entail doing things for free. So capitalism has made a lot of the technology problems that we see even worse, especially as Noble noted. And I do think it's great that she talks about that, because you got to look at the base of society. Technology just doesn't spring up. It comes from somewhere. I also like how Noble talks about solutions in this book. She doesn't just present the problems of the problem of the situation. She presents some ideas that might be beneficial. She talks about a diversity and ethics training, which is pretty good. It's not enough on its own, but it would get at the problem of color blindness in Silicon Valley, where if you talk about diversity and especially ethics, you'll help Silicon Valley understand that maybe profiting off of human suffering isn't good, and also that there's a whole lot of racism, sexism, and misogyny in society, and that not structuring your technology or your algorithms around that and making into account for it, like you're only propagating that. So that's a good place to start. Another suggestion she has is eliminating the Google monopoly, because as it stands, Google has a pretty strong monopoly in the technological fields. They frequently filter out search results for their competition, and they stifle them in any way possible. And I think that's a big problem with capitalism in general, is that like in recent years, big monopolies have been allowed to form, especially big tech monopolies like Facebook and Twitter and Google and a whole bunch of other technological companies. And so eliminating this Google monopoly, breaking it up, would allow for it to be smaller, more manageable, and you wouldn't have one company controlling the entire situation and being able to rule over the entire tech field without suffering any consequences. More competition is good because it allows people, especially people of color, to make choices of which brand they're going to use in an effort to prevent the harm being done from them. They can choose other search engines or whatnot. And then the other idea that she puts forward is FCC intervention, like the FCC actually doing its job, which it rarely wants to do, and policing Google, Facebook, Twitter, other technology groups, and making sure that they follow the laws as they're written, and also implementing new laws and regulations that prevent, what happened with Dylan Roof or what happened with any of the other like white supremacists who are rising in today's age, especially what happened on January 6th, not allowing treason to just like openly spread and foster in the online environment. Overall, I would say I really enjoyed this story, but there are some problems here and there. This book is heavily academic, which makes sense because Safiya Noble is an academic, but it does come off as a bit too academic for me, because she's often using large words, which aren't a problem, but like these. Like to the average person, they're not going to understand what like hegemony or like paradigm or all those sorts of words mean. Like this isn't, and I don't think this is intended for a wide scale audience, maybe to those who are interested in technology, but it's still a bit heavily academic, and I felt like she could have worked to make this more accessible to everyone who reads it, in terms of not really dumbing down the language, but certainly not making this seem so dry. And then another problem is the sort of bare bones limited focus that I think she has, which benefits it in terms of being able to highlight a specific issue, but it does make the story kind of feel empty at times because all she's talking about is Google, and especially after 2018 when this was published, there are so many other issues that are arising, because she only barely touches upon fake news. She only barely touches upon Twitter and what's going on with Facebook, and I feel like she could have done more there. But it's understandable given that she started in 2012, that her focus is on Google and its algorithms. But I do believe that more work could definitely have been done more. And she definitely has more space to write, because I think she only really uses 200 pages of this entire book, and that feels kind of minimalistic in nature. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Algorithms of Oppression by Safiya Noble, a pretty solid exploration of racism and sexism, misogyny, prejudice in Silicon Valley, and how Google and those related companies are aware of the issue but don't do much to fix it, and how this could lead to further violence and further trouble for minorities down the road. It's pretty bleak, and given what I know now and what I've seen now with January 6th, 2021, and the rise of anti-Semitism over the years, It's a really hard read, but necessary read. And I guess the problem is like, oh, this should have been fixed 10 years ago, but maybe it's too late now. Maybe we just shut off the internet entirely. I don't know. That would probably cause additional problems. But I do think this is an important read. It can be pretty dry at times, so I'm a bit hesitant to recommend it. But I'll say if you're interested in technology and learning about racism in Silicon Valley, this might be the book for you. I certainly enjoyed it. I don't know if it's going to be like the best of the year, and I don't even think it's the best one I read for book club, because I did read this for book club. Shout out to Bevan again. So like I read it for book club, but it's probably one of the weaker ones that I read there, which is unfortunate, because it did seem very interesting when Bevan was talking about it. But anyways, if you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I'm saying here, let's have a discussion about algorithms of oppression, and put something in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book and this author if they are interested. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and algorithmy travels. Farewell.